When it came to getting a tax deduction, HMRC said no to the lawyer and a business suit, but oddly yes to this and to this. And in this video, I'm going to deep dive into why, because for small business owners, these tax court cases can help us understand how HMRC view what clothes you can offset against your tax bill. So watch on. So first up, let's discuss the case of the lady barrister. She was self-employed, so she made a claim in her tax return for a business suit, and HMRC disagreed and took her to the tax courts. Now, this case from the early 1980s has been pretty famous in the tax world because it's kind of set the standard for what can be deducted where clothes are concerned. From her point of view, she wore a dark suit to court only, so it felt only right that she could claim it. You know, it was darker than she would normally wear. She certainly didn't go out clubbing in it. And on top of that, the court dress rules meant that she had to be dressed like it. She didn't have a choice. Now, I don't know what you think, but that sounds pretty reasonable to me. So you might think, well, why did HMRC disagree with her then? And it's because they didn't feel it was wholly and exclusively for her business. Now, this wholly and exclusively thing is a key concept to remember, because when it comes to deducting things in your business, there might be 22,000 odd pages of tax law and guidance on top of each other, but this is the key line in tax law that really matters. So when you're out and about spending money in the business, you've just got to think of this wholly and exclusively thing all the time. And the reason the courts and HMRC didn't think it was wholly and exclusively for the business is that by default it couldn't be, and that's because it protected her warmth and decency. So yeah, she had the suit on for work, but obviously she's warm, she's covering herself up, makes sense. Because as a human being, while you might select a wardrobe for workwear, ultimately, you're also going to be trying to keep yourself warm, and, not exposing yourself to the public. And therefore they just said, look, it's dual purpose. You can't say it's wholly exclusively for business when it has a dual purpose. And then on top of that, they considered dual purpose wise that actually, although she said she didn't wear it outside the court, and I think that was kind of believable, they were kind of a combination of garments that you could wear outside the court if you wanted to. And they're effectively everyday wardrobe. It wasn't like they were of special nature for a business or anything like that. Lots of other people wore suits. Now, often with self-employed expenses that are part business, part personal, you would at least be able to claim a proportion of that cost as tax deductible. But the courts felt that with this warmth and decency point, it couldn't be separated from the professional purpose and therefore didn't allow any of it. So whilst the suit was denied, one further point though that was interesting is that they did allow the wig, as this was deemed effectively staged costume and therefore okay. Now, with this concept in mind, a more recent case came at this from an opposite angle, and that's a case featuring an exotic dancer for a well-known club chain that ended up in the tax courts for her expense claims on her tax return. Now, I'm a big fan of this case. I think it's really interesting in the modern times because it not only covered clothing, but it covered a lot of the things that we see practically every day as business accountants, in that it covered things like personal care, so tanning, waxing and the like. Where we work with people like modern day influencers, these kind of things are really difficult to navigate from a tax perspective, but more on that later. Now, in her particular case, she claimed for lingerie, underwear and other outfits, including 6-inch heels. But what was cool about this one is, while HMRC disagreed with her claim, the judge ruled that actually these counted as costume. And what further backed this up, and this might not be a surprise to you, is that the lingerie and the underwear couldn't be said to provide warmth and decency. So as you can see, in one profession we had clothes and they were okay and they were a tax deduction, and in the other they weren't. Neither seemed unreasonable, it's just the way the tax rules work. And what often happens with tax rules is you get a very straightforward line in tax law, and then HMRC sort of give their opinion in their manuals, and then layered on top of that, we've then got what the tax courts say about it, and somewhere between that means that we have to make a decision on what's actually deductible. So where does this leave your average self-employed person looking for a tax deduction on clothes then? Well, for most self-employed owners, anything that's going to be deemed everyday wardrobe is just not going to be allowable for the reasons we've said. So think of like joggers that you might be wearing on site, business suits, sports clothing. So those things that could be argued they're protecting your warmth and decency, they could be everyday wardrobe, they're going to fail. And this is because of that dual purpose test we've already discussed. But you can have uniforms. So for example, a logo t-shirt. Now, you might be thinking, Dan, surely that covers your warmth and decency, and you would be absolutely right. It's a weird oddity that what HMRC do is they look at what's the purpose of it, and the fact that it provides warmth and decency, they see as like an incidental benefit, weirdly. It's just the way it works. So logoed uniforms and that kind of stuff is generally going to be okay. And you can also have protective clothing, things like high-vis jackets, hard hats, steel toe cap boots, those kind of things. And thirdly, which is the most opinion-based deduction of them all, is what's going to count as costume. So in the case with the dancer, we've seen certain outfits and underwear were okay. That seems relatively straightforward now based on the case law we have. But where it gets more tricky is saying a modern day influencer. That often is more of a judgment call about what could be considered costume and what could be everyday wardrobe. So I can't give you a straight answer on that. I'm going to have to give you the classic accounting answer of It depends on the circumstances. So one key takeaway here is that if you have made a purchase of clothes and you feel strongly that it fits into the type of criteria we've been speaking about in the video, then do your research to back up your claim or speak to a professional who might be able to help you. Because look, it might be okay. And actually we see cases that are both sides, where we see the ones where an owner's been claiming far too much, been far too aggressive, and we have to say to them, look, that's wrong. But more often than not, we see the other side of it, where somebody just hasn't claimed at all because they're worried they couldn't, and we're able to go through their expenses and say, yeah, that's a claim, that's a claim, that's a claim. And it's a great news for tax. Now, I mentioned personal care and tax and those type of items. If you're interested in understand more on that, watch this video.